Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Liberal Democrat election manifesto is out today, and at the heart of it is a pledge to offer another referendum on any Brexit deal. According to party leader Tim Farron, it would give voters a chance to say they want to remain in the EU. The LibDems are also offering several new policies aimed at young people, including dropping the voting age to 16 and a rent-to-own housing scheme. More on that in a moment, but first here's our political correspondent, Vicky Young.
He says his policies offer young people a brighter future, and Tim Farron has put Brexit at the heart of his campaign. Sun, 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 here it comes. The Lib Dems hope the promise of a referendum on any Brexit deal the government negotiates will persuade Remain voters to swing behind them. But the polls suggest the message isn't having much impact.
Certainly, there are many people in this country lacking hope. They think that the only thing on the table is Theresa May's bleak vision of us leaving the European Union with a hard Brexit.
But there are also many people who voted Remain who now accept that result, something you're unwilling to do, and they feel actually we've just got to get on with it now, and many of them think Theresa May is the person to do that.
So I think what there is out there are many people who feel like they've given up the fight, and what I'm saying to people is that I haven't. That if you believe that Britain's future is better alongside our neighbours in Europe, you should not be forced to accept a stitch-up between Brussels and London. You should have the final say.
As well as a referendum on the Brexit deal, the Liberal Democrat manifesto promises £7 billion of extra investment in education, a penny rise in income tax to fund more spending on the NHS and social care, an end to the freeze on working age benefits. And the party wants to legalise and regulate cannabis.
Off you go. One of you probably knows who's first.
There's no mention, though, of abolishing tuition fees, a policy the Lib Dems abandoned when they went into coalition with the Conservatives.
Do you now accept tuition fees were the right thing to do and they're working?
Well, you know, I voted against the rise in tuition fees. I think it's critically important that people keep their word. And that's why my advice to others is don't make promises that you cannot keep.
But would you reverse it now? Why not put reversing it in your
We've said we'd
manifesto?
put significant additional money to returning grants to students to make sure that it's affordable.
Here in southwest London, the Lib Dems are hoping for a comeback. The area voted overwhelmingly against Brexit. So how is their promise of another referendum going down with Remain voters?
It's very childish to think just because you don't like a decision that's been made and that's been voted for, that you can go back and reverse it or rearrange it. This is democracy, this is the country we live in, and I think we should support that and stand by that, even though the decision wasn't one that I liked.
I don't think that the fight should ever stop. I think it's far too important. I think it affects far too many lives, and yeah, we should carry on fighting until we have no other, fight left in us.
I was disappointed with the news about a potential referendum because I think that ship has sailed now and it's about trying to get the best kind of Brexit.
And so how many seats do you need to gain for you to keep your job?
My sense is that we need to increase our number of seats, increase our vote share, but what we need above all else is to offer the British people this one chance. This is the last chance saloon for Britain. If you believe Britain is open, tolerant and united, if you reject the extreme version of Brexit that Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn and UKIP have pushed through the House of Commons, if you reject that and want a better future, the Liberal Democrats are the only party offering you hope.
2 years ago, the Lib Dems narrowly avoided an election wipeout. They're hoping Brexit has thrown them a political lifeline. Vicky Young, BBC News, Teddington.
As we've heard, the Liberal Democrats are hoping to attract young voters, not just with that pledge to have another referendum on any Brexit deal, but with several other policies, including housing and the voting age. Our home editor, Mark Easton, has been to Cambridge, a key target seat for the Lib Dems, to see what issues are concerning young voters there.
We're here to talk to you about the election today. Let us know your thoughts and tweet us at Call Radio.
The voice of the young. So often ignored by the politicians, it's loud and clear at Cambridge Regional College.
This could be about anything such as Brexit, student tuition, student loans.
Core Radio Cambridge broadcasts to thousands of potential young voters in the Liberal Democrats' #1 target seat. So what's on their mind?
I think politicians have to start appealing to young people, because these young people are going to grow old.
The Lib Dem manifesto promises young people cheaper bus fares, higher welfare payments, help with housing, and votes for 16-year-olds. Is lowering the voting age the kind of policy that cuts it with these student hairdressers?
A lot of people my age don't know enough about it, and they kind of they go with what their parents think, and they're very influenced, so I don't think it's a great idea, to be quite honest.
Brexit's a big issue for you, isn't it? Explain why.
Well, I'm a British citizen, but my parents are Portuguese, and so are the rest of my family.
Now, the Liberal Democrats are saying they want a much softer Brexit that's going to sort of retain access to the single market, free movement and so on. Is that appealing for someone like you?
Well, I guess it's all talk. I don't know if it's going to be done.
Political wisdom decrees that your manifesto should appeal to people who will actually vote. So the Liberal Democrats' focus on younger people is something of a risk. 18 to 24-year-olds are almost half as likely to vote as pensioners. This college has been encouraging students to register before next Monday's deadline, but cities with large student populations have been reporting a big drop in registrations. And there's a credibility issue for the Lib Dems. After promising not to put up university tuition fees in the 2010 election, they voted to do just that in government. Are the Lib Dems damaged goods now?
I mean, I don't really remember when they put them up. I was probably, just finishing secondary school and stuff, so I didn't really pay big attention to it. But for me, knowing what they've done, I probably wouldn't be able to trust them.
I feel like they're stuck in a catch-22, because what they're giving is a mix between, in the middle, they're not going to completely cut tuition fees, but they're going to offer a maintenance grant, which is great because it's accessible as it should be. Everybody should be given the chance to go to uni.
It's just silly now.
So these are Lib Dem target voters in a Lib Dem target seat.
I'm quite excited but nervous at the same time, so...
For the party, a lot depends on how they respond to the promises of politicians. Mark Easton, BBC News, Cambridge.
Here, there were no big surprises when the Liberal Democrats went public with their election manifesto today. As expected, the pledge to hold a second Brexit referendum is there, as are policies like tax increases to fund better public services and legalising cannabis. Our political editor, Robert Peston, reports.
The new Liberal Democrat look, still very keen on the European Union, but also waving the Union flag. Yes, this is where, in just a few minutes, the Lib Dems will launch a manifesto whose big policy is that we'd have another referendum after the terms of Brexit are agreed that could potentially keep us in the EU after all. Now, if this reminds you of another minority party that till recently seemed to be bossing all the other parties, that occurred to me when I met the Lib Dem leader in a West London state school.
So you basically become a single-issue party. It's all about this second referendum. You're UKIP in reverse. You personally, you're Nigel Farage in reverse.
So we have a manifesto, the heart of which is indeed to give people that right to have the final say on the Brexit deal, so it's not stitched up elsewhere and imposed upon us. But it's about hope beyond Brexit. It's about saying that the choices Theresa May as making are things that are going to damage our future, our families, our children, and this is an opportunity to prevent them.
In the manifesto, other eye-catching measures include lifting all income tax rates by a penny in the pound to raise £6.3 billion a year, to provide more money for the NHS and social care for the elderly. And unlike Labour, the Lib Dems would end the government's benefit freeze at a cost of £3.3 billion a year. The Lib Dems would also raise £1 billion from a new duty on cannabis, which they would legalise.
You have chosen to put up, or you would put up, the basic rate of tax. Labour has chosen only to raise taxes for richer people. Why put up the basic rate of tax?
Well, first of all, health and social care are genuinely in crisis. A country that cares about its elderly people does not leave them rotting on trolleys in corridors.
But you could raise the money in other ways. You could raise the money without putting up the basic rate of tax.
We have chosen to be honest with the British people. I don't think the British people, folks out there, believe politicians who promise there's a magic money tree that can somehow solve the health and social care crisis.
Now, Farron has been attacked for views on gay sex and abortions, which actually he denies holding, but are seen as flowing from his passionately held Christian convictions.
I mean, there does seem to be something slightly odd, which is that Theresa May seems to get credit for being a Christian, and people seem to want to beat you about the face for being a Christian. What do you think is going on? It's a bit odd, isn't it?
Well, I mean, from my point of view, this is a country which is incredibly free and tolerant, and if you want to belong to any minority, this is about as good a place as you could want to be. And I'm always delighted to answer
Are Christians
questions.
a minority, do you think, in this country?
Well, yes, I think all religious groups are a minority in this country, and that's how it is. And I think what we should be embracing is that Britain is open and tolerant and united.
Sure, thanks a lot.
Hello all. Talking of minorities, he knows the Lib Dems won't win the election, but here in metropolitan Liberal East London tonight, he hopes to start nudging us towards loving the EU once more. Robert Peston, ITV News.
Well, if the Lib Dems are to make any headway, then seats like Cheltenham could hold the key. The Conservatives took Cheltenham in 2015 with a majority of just over 6,500. Previously, it had been a Lib Dem stronghold through 5 general elections since 1992. And it's also a big Remain constituency by 56 to 44%. Penny Marshall went to talk to Cheltenham's voters about their concerns.
As the rain came down in Cheltenham, Liberal Democrats were hoping their chance of winning over voters was going up. They're after the youth vote, with plenty of promises to entice voters at the town's university. But even the Remainers here mostly didn't like the idea of a second referendum.
We've all had our say already in whether we want to vote to remain or to leave, and the majority was to leave, whether you know the other half liked it or not.
The fact that they are willing to overturn a democratic decision, that doesn't really sit easy with me.
Their other promises had mixed appeal.
There's a huge consumer base for cannabis, and the more it's regulated, the more it will be monitored and the more it will be safe for people to take it.
I don't think to vote at 16, and I think you do just need those extra couple of years and more exposure to understand what's going on in the world.
And with time on their hands, some of Cheltenham's older voters like the one-penny tax plans.
I think it's an excellent idea, and we need it to fund our National Health Service. I'm a former nurse. I still have lots of friends who work in the hospitals and around and about who are having an absolutely ghastly time.
It's quite a good body of sensible arguments there, and they're not too outrageous. They're not sort of too extreme.
But it wasn't all about policy today. At a local brewery, the Lib Dem leader was also being judged.
Anyone who can U-turn, change their mind and such like so frequently on issues such as abortion and gay marriage, then how good will they be when it comes to sticking to their guns over negotiations involving complex international issues?
The politicians are taking it in turns to identify some of the problems, but soon the people will have to choose who is offering the best solutions. Penny Marshall, ITV News, Cheltenham.
Now here, an ocean away, the Liberal Democrats are launching their election manifesto this evening with a major pitch for the youth vote. Among their proposals, a new rent-to-own scheme for first-time buyers, the reinstatement of housing benefits for young people and cheaper bus travel for 16 to 20-year-olds. They also want to offer another referendum once the results of the Brexit negotiations become clear. But after the tuition fees fiasco during their spell in coalition with the Conservatives, can the Lib Dems really hope to rekindle the passions of the young? Our political correspondent Michael Crick is at the manifesto launch in East London this evening, and he joins us now. Michael.
Well, Tim Farron began speaking here just 2 or 3 minutes ago, talking about Brexit. He said that he didn't believe that people who had voted leave were bad people. Indeed, he admitted that some members of his own family had voted leave, although the members of the family wouldn't admit to it. Now, of course, the promise on the second referendum after a Brexit deal is the main pledge in the manifesto that the party launched today. And indeed, Mr Farron is talking on top of an EU flag, the blue and yellow stars. But Mr Farron began the day not here, but on the other side of the capital.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Tim Farron was at Holland Park School in Kensington, West London, one of Britain's very first comprehensives. It's been a dark, lonely winter for the Liberal Democrats these past 2 years. They hope today's manifesto will make things a bit brighter. The Lib Dems pledge an extra $6 billion a year extra money for schools. They pledged too a slightly bigger sum for health and social care and to boost benefits by almost $10 billion a year. We tested the policies in Hackney, not far from where Tim Farron is speaking tonight. A big theme of this manifesto is policies directed towards young people. The second referendum on Brexit, the legalisation of marijuana, a bus pass for young people, votes at 16, bringing back housing benefit from the age of 18 onwards. But also a couple of policies to help with the housing market. One is called rent to own, whereby tenants would gradually, over a period of 30 years, acquire a bigger and bigger stake in the ownership of their property. Another scheme, known as Help to Rent, would involve state-backed loans to enable people to put together a tenancy deposit. Are those the sort of things that would appeal to you?
I think so, yeah. As a young person who probably can't buy a house ever, it's quite a nice idea that we might be able to in the future.
Twins Clint and Lee had come here for a modelling shoot. Do these sort of things appeal to you?
Last two do.
Yeah,
the last two.
A couple of them at least, a couple of them.
The Brexit and the marijuana, that sounds right.
A second referendum for you is important, is it?
Yeah, definitely, man. Try to sort that out, because it don't sound good, does it?
No,
It sounds like he went downhill doing that, man. It's got, oh, man, no one's got anything good to say about that, really, so it looks like it has to be looked at again.
So how would the Liberal Democrats pay for this lot? Well, first, they'd levy an extra penny on every level of income tax to pay for their extra spending on health and social care. Then they'd reverse the government's cuts in corporation tax, capital gains tax and inheritance tax. And they found another ingenious source, what one might call an extra pot, a duty on the cannabis that they're planning to legalise. It would raise $1 billion a year, they reckon.
I've been looking at the manifesto, so I'm sort of swaying my way to the Lib Dems, obviously with Farron in charge as well. So
do you like Farron?
I think he's alright. I think he's a good geezer and that, so I think he's alright.
Good geezer?
He's alright, he seems alright.
What would put you off about voting the Liberal Democrats?
Just the past, when they were with the Tories in government, it didn't go quite so well for us as students.
A lot of our information about politics comes from social media and Facebook, and Liberal Democrats have zero online presence in terms of what we see. Yeah, I only see online Labour versus Conservative, and it's just arguments every day for and against the two parties.
That is fascinating.
And I've only heard this morning, the only reason I heard about Liberal Democrats is because the legalisation of marijuana.
And what do you think of Tim Farron?
Who's Tim Farron?
Well, this morning I spoke to Mr. Farron and I began by asking him how he reconciles his pledge to eliminate the deficit by 2020 with all his pledges on spending, the pledge to get rid of the public sector pay cap, all at a time when he thinks Brexit will harm the economy.
So the day-to-day spending deficit, the current deficit, we would clear by 2019-20. The difference between ourselves and the Conservatives is the Conservatives are budgeting for a £23 billion surplus in that year. That's £23 billion of money being squirreled away for a rainy day, and most head teachers will tell you through their crumbling roofs it's raining right now.
But you think Brexit will harm the economy, so the tax revenues are not going to be as high as the Conservatives.
So we're using the OBR's figures. Obviously, if the Liberal Democrats were to get our way and we were to be in the single market, then things could be different, they could be better. But it's right that you write your manifesto on what is rather than what you would hope to be. And our aim is to make different choices to the Conservatives. So they choose to give away tax cuts to huge corporations. They choose to squirrel away money and create a deficit, or rather a surplus, that we don't need. We'll make a smaller surplus of £9 billion in that 2019-20 year. And the difference is we'll use that money on supporting our schools. Remember, 2 out of 3 schools are about to sack at least one teacher in the next 8 weeks because of Theresa May's policies.
You want, you reckon you can raise £1 billion a year from a cannabis tax? I mean, this is extraordinary. There isn't. I mean, so your economic plans are dependent on people smoking cannabis.
Our economic plans are dependent upon us balancing the books by 2019-20
and people smoking cannabis,
and making sure we put a penny on income tax for
people
health.
smoking
so
cannabis.
£6 billion a year going into our hospitals. Now, the policy to do what Canada's doing, to regulate cannabis, to make sure that people are protected from harm, and to make sure the amount of money you just set out doesn't go into the pockets of gangsters, that is a good thing, and it's on the basis of advice we've had from acting and previous chief constables. It's about minimising harm to people who make use of substances like that, and above all else, making sure you take back control from the criminal gangs.
You say that a priority in the next Parliament must be making the positive case for immigration. So presumably immigration would go up under the Liberal Democrats?
We certainly wouldn't set false targets that do Britain harm.
Well, would you want it to go up or down?
Well, we want immigration to be the rate it needs to be for the good of Britain.
So
and
it
this
might
is
go
the
up.
and this
It
is the
might go
danger.
up.
It could. I mean, look, under Theresa May, it will end up going up. She'll just set a stupid target
So
that she'll
under Tim
break.
Farron it would
And
go
she spent 6 years as Home Secretary, ritual humiliation at her own hands, setting foolish targets that damaged her reputation and damaged Britain. What you want, what all of us want, is an immigration policy that's good for British business, good for our universities, good for tourism, good for farming, good for our economy,
so
good for our health
right
service.
to conclude, would they, that it's likely to go up under the Liberal Democrats?
You want to have rules that restrict immigration, but setting a false target just to appease the UKIP wing that's now taken over the Tory party, rather than using immigration as a way to benefit our country, that is foolish.
Isn't it absurd for you to say that your aim is to become the official opposition to Theresa May's Conservatives? I mean, for that to be the case, you'd have to be out campaigning to win 150, 200 seats, depending on how many Labour get. You're not fighting for that, you're fighting for a few dozen.
So Theresa May called this general election for the benefit of the Conservative Party, not for the country, in order to get a landslide. And at the moment, we're in a situation where we only need to imagine what our communities might be like the day after the general election, where Theresa May gets the kind of landslide that Margaret Thatcher got back then. And so accepting that Theresa May is heading for a landslide, there's nothing defeatist about that. It is just honest. There's too many people spinning yarns in this election. Let's instead give the British people something better to vote for. And I don't know what the limit is to our ambition.
And you'd be happy with 30?
I'll be happy if we can give the British people of this country, the people in every community in this country, the final say on the Brexit deal, so that they have the right to judge what Theresa May and the Brussels bureaucrats stitch up between them, whether it's good enough for them. And if they don't think it's good enough for them, surely they've got the right to reject it and to vote to remain.
Well, it was the Lib Dems' turn to be centre of attention today, with their manifesto released this morning, a pitch explicitly aimed at not making the Lib Dems the governing party, but the opposition. Instead, they concede in the second paragraph that Theresa May will win. Well, more on the manifesto shortly, but the party's the centre of attention in another way too, because it is arguably the surprise of this campaign. One might have thought that the clarity of their position on Brexit would have allowed them to suck up Remainer votes in large numbers, but there's not much sign of that in the polls. Maybe they can pick up particular seats. Maybe the promise of a second referendum will now gather support for them. But so far, no progress. Well, before we reflect on that with Sir Vince Cable, David Grossman has been in Wells in the southwest, which was Lib Dem country.
This is one of the wells that gives England's smallest city its name. The West Country was also the wellspring of much Lib Dem success in recent years, but the waters of victory flood no longer. Tim Farron desperately needs today's manifesto launch to get some of the magic back in places like this.
Tim Farron.
The manifesto launch was in a nightclub in East London under disco lights. Mr. Farron promised that his dream of overturning Brexit was definitely staying alive.
In June last year, we voted for a departure, but we did not vote for a destination. So I want you to have your choice over your future.
But the forecasts for his party are not sunny.
Like this part of the Bishop's Palace in Wells, there's not much left now of the Lib Dems' once magnificent West Country edifice. In 2010, they won 5 of the 6 seats in Somerset. And then the little yellow Lib Dem bird was sucked into the vacuum cleaner of the 2015 general election.
Tessa Munt was the Lib Dems MP here up until 2015. Today, she's meeting clients of the Wells Food Bank. In this month's council elections, she bucked the national trend, winning a council seat from the Tories. Now, she's standing on the party's national offer. The Lib Dems manifesto promises a referendum on the final Brexit deal with an option to stay in the EU. There's help for home buyers with a rent-to-own scheme, a promise to reverse £9.7 billion worth of benefits cuts, and legislation to legalise cannabis. But what status does this manifesto have, given even the Lib Dems say they won't win the election?
You know, you absolutely need people like my colleagues and me to stand there and ask the sensible questions in what is a period where we have no idea what Brexit is going to look like on the May agenda. We're definitely going to have Mrs May as Prime Minister, of that I'm convinced. It really depends on the size of her majority.
This is Penniless Porch in Wells, where beggars would hold out their hands to worshippers on their way to the cathedral. For Labour, Wells is a distant prospect, although they claim to be making an impact on the Lib Dem vote.
Well, you know, I'm out campaigning, and I literally choose deliberately places, houses that have got Vote Lib Dem up, and I go and challenge why they have a Lib Dem poster. And I have a whole stack of Labour ones to replace those once we've had that conversation, and I've managed to persuade them that actually the vote should be for Labour.
James Heapy is the Conservative candidate who deposed Tessa Munt in 2015. If he's looking relaxed, it may be because UKIP, who polled 5,500 votes in Wales in the last election, are not putting up a candidate this time around.
I'm not sure we've yet found anything that people are sort of uniting behind as a reason to switch across to Vote Lib Dem. Their offer seems to be that they want to be in opposition, and people seem to think that a general election is about voting for a government, and I agree with them, and I'm not sure that their message is being particularly inspiring on the doorstep.
And here is the Lib Dem problem. Local support doesn't always show through in a national election.
You're going to try a sample then, Damien?
Roger Wilkins has spent 50 years perfecting the art of making Somerset cider. He likes it like he likes his government, strong.
I know Tessa very well, and I said to her one day, I said, Tessa, I said, the only trouble is you're one of the best MPs we've ever had, but I said, you want to get a new boss, I said to her.
And what about Brexit? Does the fact that the Lib Dems are saying that we should have another chance to reconsider the Brexit?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, we voted to come out. We got to stay out. You can't have a vote and then go back.
So, if you want loyalty in Wells, meet Bryn and Wynne, the Bishop's Palace moat swans. They mate for life. Voters, it seems, are somewhat more promiscuous.
David Grossman there, and here is a list of all the candidates running for election in Wells. Well, Sir Vince Cable was the Liberal Democrat MP for Twickenham until 2015 and the Secretary of State for Business as part of the coalition government. He's now fighting to regain his seat at this general election. Very good evening to you. Can I just ask you about the Tory plans on social care, which are broken this evening, causing quite a lot of excitement. Do you think they're going to work? They're essentially a less, more generous means test. You'll be keeping up to 100,000 of your house or other possessions.
Well, of course, it doesn't deal with the immediate problem. I mean, there is an immediate problem of social care because of the cutback in local authority funding, and that's why we've come up with our proposal of the penny on income tax for the health service and social care. There's an immediate crisis, and that doesn't address it. They're dealing with the long-term problem, and as your analysis a few minutes ago showed, there are some people who are going to lose out very badly. I mean, people who are taking care in their own home, and I don't in a way understand the basic thrust of what their policy, because they've held up for 8 years or so an attempt to get a cross-party agreement on the ground that they were opposed to a death tax, in other words, taking money from the property when people die. They're now proposing it, so that does seem to be a bit of a U-turn.
Does that seem to you to be a death tax? So it's your money. They're going to take, they're going to help you pay your bills by lending you money against that death tax, lending you money against that house and taking it after. Would you call that a tax, or is that
the principle, I think, is unobjectionable. I mean, rolling it up
and
taking
it. You support it?
Well, we have done in the past, but I think what their current policy seems to be missing is the element of personal insurance, which was part of the original attempt to get a cross-party agreement under Andrew Dilnot, and that seems to be missing.
They're means testing the winter fuel allowance, which your party is doing as well, and they'll put that money into care. You're a party that's supporting the triple lock.
Right.
Now, in the past, you and Nick Clegg and some others have suggested it's something of an anomaly, that it was there when pensioners were poor, or that maybe it needs to be reviewed. Why are you sticking by the triple lock?
Well, it is generally the case that since the financial crisis, elderly people have done relatively well relative to younger people. But I don't think you solve that problem by pushing pensioners back into poverty. I mean, until the triple lock was introduced, we had a problem that very large numbers of people on the state pension were falling below the basic poverty line, were getting into means-tested benefits, were not claiming.
But we've dealt with that now because we've put the state pension up now.
We've dealt with it.
So you don't have to keep it up forever and ever, do you?
Well, I don't quite see what the problem is with the triple lock. I mean, there is one element of it that has been controversial, which is the commitment to 2% minimum increase, and that potentially was a problem if you have a world of no inflation. But we're moving away from that world now. I mean, the inflation this year is expected to be above the Bank of England level, and that doesn't present a problem.
Right, so it's probably not going to cost much over the
The
next
idea of a
years
pension guarantee seems to me a civilised and sensible one.
Right. Can I suggest to you, one of the issues you have is that you're a party that's trying to face in two slightly different directions to these southwestern seats, quite elderly populations in some cases, and also to a kind of slightly younger demographic, more metropolitan demographic, different kind of voters in other seats. Is that why you've got the triple lock in there, to be blunt, to make sure you've got something to pitch to the voters, of the older voters of the South?
They're both legitimate interests. And we have a large elderly population who, in the past, experienced significant problems of pensioner poverty. That problem was substantially alleviated by a reform that the Liberal Democrats pressed for in the coalition, and we want to keep it.
Let's talk about Brexit, because I want to be clear. If I say I'm in favour of Brexit, and pretty strongly in favour of it, I really should not vote for the Lib Dems, should I? I mean, if so, that would be the correct advice.
Well, there are many other issues, and there are many people who support Brexit but may not be happy with the UKIP-style Brexit that the Prime Minister has committed us to. In other words, withdrawing from the single market and the customs union.
But you can't sort of have it both ways, because you can't say you should vote for us if you're for Remain, but you should also potentially vote for us if you're Brexit. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Well,
again, you're facing sort of both ways,
No, not at all. It's a different issue, right? People have had that vote of Remain, Brexit. We've had the referendum. A decision has been made to leave. We respect that. We're now dealing with a separate problem,
but
which is what happens in 2 years' time.
Why are you putting Remain on the ballot when you have your second referendum on it? That doesn't sound like you've accepted the...
No, it does. We're dealing with a different question. I thought Tony Blair... Let me explain. Tony Blair had a very nice metaphor. He said, look, we've made a decision collectively as a country, by a narrow majority, to move house, right? But we don't know where we're going. We don't know what the new house looks like. If at the end of the day we're left with a dwelling which is appalling and it's full of dry rot and rising damp and it is uninhabitable, then the option surely has to be of going back to where we started. The option has to be a new
house, rather than... We need to leave it there. Vince Cave, thanks very much indeed.
I've been getting